I was thinking of Sam and Liza when I put this up. Boy, how did we get here? So I thought it was kind of funny. A lot of us do paint ourselves into a corner at times through things we do. So I happened to see this online. I thought it was kind of funny. The other thing I wanted to kind of warm up a little bit here is, you know how important our thoughts are, right? Our thoughts are key. We gave a series of messages years ago entitled The Battle for the Mind." So the mind is like the bridge of the ship, you know. Sometimes I have this part-time gig going. I work with this gentleman who has developmental disabilities, and sometimes they're in the morning before I start some of his programs to help him achieve greater independence in the community. Sometimes the supervisor has these meetings and they want to know how we're feeling. And I went to the supervisor. I said, "Listen, I just want to mention that feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings. Your mind is the key, what you're thinking. So your thinking controls your feelings." And I saw this. I thought it was kind of cute. It's you can just see it's right here. It says, can't read it, "Make a nest of pleasant thoughts." And you have this little kid out there, just relaxing. The idea is it's very calm, it's very tranquil, and I really liked it because how often or not so often is our mind filled in such a way that we really are relaxed. And of course that's the big challenge for Shabbat, right? It's not so much what we do physically, it's getting our minds to just to just calm down from moving about 1,000 miles an hour and just. But I thought it was really nice because it's so important. Our thoughts can really we can be not moving at all, and our mind can be going at all kinds of rate speed, and we just can't relax. But he looks relaxed, so I thought that was kind of cool. The other thing, just on the lighter side, we haven't gotten any snow yet, but this is Moses in New England, and so if it was today, there it would be, So, by the way, the Bible critics often kind of pick and chew away at the text and say that it was low tide, and a lot of different things. If that's the case, then the entire Egyptian army drowned in low tide. So you kind of have to, you have to kind of cut and slice much of the scriptures to, to kind of.
They say you can drown in the bathtub. So.
That's true. Well, yeah, that is also true. Well, I guess it's going to take a lot of water, but that would be a challenge to me to see that hole. Okay, so just to kind of bring us up to speed. I know last time we were together, we spoke about Zion, if you recall. We said that Zion, the first time we really see this word Zion, and it's of course it's associated with Jerusalem, but the first time we see it, of course, is in 2 Samuel, I think it was chapter 5, where David, takes this stronghold from the Jebusites, this hill, this mountain, and since then we were looking at so Zion kind of starts out as this small, insignificant place, and yet by the time you get to the Psalms and even later, you get to the prophets also, you see these majestic descriptions of Zion. And that's where we kind of left off. We also, but I just want to move forward with that a little bit today for the time we're together. But we also talked about the Mosaic revelation. We were talking about the call of Abraham. We finished that, and we got to the Mosaic revelation, and we said that this amazing story of slavery of God's people, of the chosen people, really is the background setting for the Mosaic revelation, right? So that we said that covenant didn't do away with the earlier covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. And this is why Reformed theologians, replacement theology, I think has such trouble, because one of the things they do is they don't mark the distinction between the covenants. They kind of see the Old Testament as kind of one colossal old. This is the old covenant, and then the new, and they differentiate between the old being legalistic and law, and the new being grace. But one of the problems, I think, with replacement theology is they don't make distinction between the covenants, because the earlier Abrahamic covenant, of course, precedes the Mosaic covenant, and the Abrahamic covenant was a unilateral, unconditional covenant. It wasn't dependent upon Israel's performance. And of course, with the coming of the Mosaic covenant, God was really just, later the rabbis really began to see the Mosaic covenant as kind of a works righteousness system in which one could obligate God to do something if they did this. And what it does is they instead of seeing it simply as guidance for a people who had already responded to God's grace. Because remember, Abraham believed God, he trusted God, and God accredited it to him, he propitiated it to him as righteousness. So even within Judaism historically, we have this understanding of faith, of faith being attributed to righteousness, being attributed to our faith, and that's so there's very big in Judaism today is the mitzvot and what we do, and I don't want to minimize what we do. What we do is very important. But Abraham believed God. What did he believe? Well, we said that Abraham had a parallel faith to ours. Wasn't exactly like ours, but Abraham had enough faith to believe that God could to travel onward with God into an area, a land, a place that he knew nothing of. And of course, Abraham had enough faith to believe that he was going to have descendants from Sarah, who was well past childbearing. So the understanding, Abraham's faith is parallel to our faith, in that essentially faith is that which brings what is dead to life. Faith is that which brings that which does not exist, looks at that which does not exist as though it does exist. And that's what makes Abraham's faith parallel to our faith, because of course we all, as prior to our salvation, Paul describes us as being dead in trespasses and sins. And out of that, in that state of death, God breathed life into us by his grace, by his mercy, and now we can walk in newness of life. We can walk relying on the Holy Spirit. We can walk in grace, which, by the way, I think it was John Nelson Darby in the mid-19th century, so about 1850, who lived in Great Britain, and Darby was an Anglican priest. And if my understanding is correct, Darby became very discouraged because people in his congregation were leaving the idea of getting saved and trying to growing in faith to the place where your life was actually changing and you were becoming obedient to things that God was saying. That wasn't very popular, and people were leaving his church, his congregation. So he kind of coined or came up with this idea of faith being unmerited favor, instead of faith being empowerment for walking and pleasing God, walking in obedience. Faith really is defined by Rabbi Paul in the book of Romans, particularly Romans 6 and 7, as empowerment to walk in obedience, because Paul says, he uses many verses, but he said, he says, now shall you continue in sin that grace may abound, right? So Paul has this idea of grace being an empowerment to walk in obedience and walk in power, which really means to walk and obey what God is telling you to do, which is really the law, has to do with the law. So, but John Nelson Darby came up with this idea, and he began to separate things too. What he did was he began to separate salvation from lordship. So a person can be saved and make no change, zero changes to their life at all. And that person, he says the right kind of prayer, makes a profession, Jesus comes into his heart, and he's saved. Because anything, if there was any iota of works, it would not be of grace, said John Nelson Darby, and of course, the whole school of theology of dispensationalism today. But that's not how Paul defines it. Paul doesn't define grace like that. And so, but this is really where it came from, this idea of grace. But all this to say that, the Mosaic revelation was the background was slavery. Moses, but later, by the time you get to the time of Yeshua, the rabbis began to see the Mosaic revelation as kind of a works righteousness system, whereby with legality, whereby one could obligate God to do something. And we know that that's true because if you really study the sects in the first century, the Pharisees or the Prushim, the Tzaddikim or the Sadducees, you see these were not just sects, they were actual programs. They were programs to initiate the coming of the Messiah. And they felt if we could just do enough of this, certainly God would have to send his Messiah and liberate us from the shackles of Rome. And so it became very popular, and they lost sight of the Mosaic revelation simply being guidance for a people, a constitution of life, guidance for a people who had already responded to God's grace, who had already walked in God's grace. Grace is lined throughout all the covenants. But anyway, so we did see, we said it was significant that God's revelation of the Jewish people in the Moses account is manifested through a program of a dispossessed, enslaved people. And so, God is the one, so this tells us that God is the one who cares for the poor, he cares for the disenfranchised, he cares for the disadvantaged, the widow, the aged, those who are defenseless. That's just part of God's nature. God is their defender, right? And so Israel was birthed out of that. They should have had, they should have been very sympathetic and even empathetic, more so than sympathetic, but empathetic toward the needs and the plight of the disadvantaged and the disenfranchised. And that's what they didn't do, because the prophets talk about injustice and false measures and not bringing justice due to the defenseless. And so, but of course, when we get to the New Covenant, of course, we see that part of Yeshua's ministry, or the kind of what do you call the definition of his ministry or his resume is that which preaching the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives. And so, so we see that Yeshua in his own ministry is one who, he cares for the poor, he cares for the defenseless. And so if we jump over to Isaiah 11, it says, "But with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with fairness for the afflicted of the earth." And so he said that was like the acid test of any administration to have special concern for those who can't fend for themselves. But that really was the nature of the Mosaic revelation. That was the background. And so Israel was always to be sensitive to those who were disadvantaged. And that says a lot about us too. That's true about us too. So I don't want to go on further with the Mosaic revelation and share, in a sense, how it really is. We have to get away from this idea of the Old Testament being harsh and legalistic, and the New Testament being lenient and full of grace. Because there was grace that was lined throughout the Mosaic revelation. Obviously, it was great. It was the grace of God that gave them a constitution. But the nature of the Mosaic law, it had over the years, at least my limited understanding and exposure in a very limited way to some of the biblical scholars and historians, we understand that that within the books of Moses, there is a style of writing. If you look at it, and specifically um, Exodus chapter 20, what we call the Ten Commandments, Leviticus, specifically chapters 19 through 26, and then the entire book of Deuteronomy. Everything else is more of an expansion and an addition to that. But though at least these historians and Bible scholars are seeing within these documents a style of writing, really what they would call covenant documents, or a style of writing that tells us that the Torah books or the law is not a legalistic system of works righteousness, but more like a treaty, a national constitution between God and his subjects, between God and the nation of Israel. The style of writing, of course, parallels all ancient treaties, specifically the Hittite treaty from about 1500 BC, which really becomes the basis for all of God's dealings with Israel, because in these treaties there was a king, usually perceived to be benevolent, and then were there his subjects, and the king first laid out what he had done for his subjects, and in response the subjects were to respond with simple obedience. And so that's the style of writing that we see the Torah in, and this should really, in a sense, be kind of settled in our minds that we're really not talking about a harsh legalistic system. Of course, Israel was a nation, and they had a constitution of life, and there was, of course, there was punishment, but there's punishment in our American system too. It doesn't mean that God is any less gracious, but a people, a nation. Israel was a nation. It's not like the body of Messiah today, which is a people group called out from the nations into this living organism called the ecclesia or the ecclesia. They were a nation, and as such, they needed a constitution, they needed a law, they needed a way of life. And it was very gracious of God to give them this. And so, but anyway, the treaty becomes the basis now for all of God's dealings with Israel. Central in the treaty, as we said, were Exodus chapter 20, Leviticus chapter 19 through 26, and the entire book of Leviticus. And of course, all the other laws and instructions are kind of come around that and are additions. So the point is, if we understand that to be true, and I believe it is, then we can never see again the Torah as providing us with a dispensation of law as opposed to now a dispensation of grace in the New Testament. And I just wanted to just quickly just look at some of the things real quickly. So you start out like the whole book of Deuteronomy kind of fits this treaty. So if you look at the first chapter or two of the book of Deuteronomy, you have kind of a preamble. You can see I don't think I have it with me, but I might have it like the sections of the treaty, and I didn't really. By the way, here's those are the two theological systems that we have been most influenced in our Western world, living here in America, and oh yeah, I do. I think I do have it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Central among covenant treaty documents are Exodus 20, Leviticus 19 through 26, and the entire book of Deuteronomy. So if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, you see a few things there. You start out with a preamble. The preamble is basically kind of an introductory paragraph, kind of like we the people in our Constitution, so it's kind of like an introduction. It provides just a brief summary. What we find there in the first two chapters of the book of Deuteronomy is God kind of revisits history. He goes over the things that he had done for Israel. the response of the people. The next thing is an historic prologue. That's kind of a brief summary of the history of Israel. You know what they. It would show how God responded to them. It would show the response of the people. It would recount the deliverance from Egypt and all that stuff. And then after that, you get to the stipulations of the covenant. This has to do. It tells what God did for Israel. It recounts different acts of grace He provided, and their response. And then fourth is blessings and cursings. By the way, in the third section, stipulations and covenants, and I wish I had a copy of all those for you, but I don't think I do. Yeah, I do. Okay, so I guess I do. Okay, yeah, so there's the kind of treaty structure. So we started out with a preamble. So that's kind of an introductory paragraph. This is the book of Deuteronomy. You get to an historical prologue. That's kind of a brief summary of their history, recounting what God did. You get to number 3, the stipulations. That's kind of where we find the Shema in and all of that. The basic idea of loving and trusting God. He's a good God, so he's worthy of our love and trust. Then you move from there to the blessings and cursings. Of course, that's obedience is rewarded, and disobedience is punished. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't alter God's grace. We as a people need a way of life, a constitution to live by. There has to be kind of retribution, if we go astray, because we end up harming ourselves and other people. So there was this idea of obedience is blessed, disobedience is not. And then you get down to finally at the very end, succession of arrangements. That's where the book of Deuteronomy starts to talk about the fact that it provides for continuity through Joshua. And so so I just wanted to just introduce that just briefly to get away from this idea of this lack of continuity and harsh contrast, like airtight contrast, old covenant and new covenant. There's great continuity, and this set the stage for, of course, even greater grace coming being personified in the person of Yeshua. When it says law came through Moses, but grace and truth, it doesn't mean that in sharp contrast to that. The law, again, was God's gracious way of life for Israel. As a matter of fact, it was an exemplary way of life. The nations were to look at that and look at the fishbowl people called Israel and see what a loving, wise, great God He was with all these stipulations and all these laws and ways of life. So anyway, that was just so it's essential in integrating the old covenant with the new covenant that we look at that and we see kind of a balanced understanding, and we see continuity with the whole Bible that way. The Ten Commandments, that's kind of an interesting one too. That was part of our. We said the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, was where we see evidence of that, and I'll see if I have it with me, but I did have a list of the Ten Commandments. If I can find it. Okay, I should have had these things, but
With the Lord wanting you to test us and see if we can name all of them.
yeah, I know that would be a test, really. Yeah, you're right about that. Oh, I guess I don't have it handy. I do have it, but it's time to look for it. But the point is, we're kind of familiar enough to know when we come to the Ten Commandments, we often see the first commandment, at least within larger Christian circles, being, thou shalt have, or you shall have no other gods before me. And then that's kind of elaborated. But I understand that within Jewish circles, within Jewish space, they don't see it that way. And I think this is one thing within Judaism that is good, that we can glean from that. What they see as the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now, that's not per se a commandment, but it's the beginning of this section, and it lends evidence to the fact that we are looking at a treaty, a between a suzerain or a great leader, a monarch or a king and his subjects. So the king introduces himself to his subjects by saying, "Hey, look, I am the Lord your God. I was the one who took you out of this incubator of slavery and death. I saved your life when you could not. And if I hadn't, you would not be alive. I took you out of that, and now I'm asking that you do this and this and this." Simple obedience. And remember we said in this class, God never required perfection under the older covenant. That's I believe a Christian misinterpretation, because we said when you get over to the first chapters of the Gospels, specifically Luke, you see that there were certain those who walked blamelessly in all the commandments. So what did God require? He required faithfulness and fidelity to his system of sacrifice and forgiveness. And if they walked in fidelity, if they walked in loyalty, not perfect, not sinning, but if they walked in fidelity and loyalty, God sees them as righteous, And so to try to get away, to try to understand, see greater continuity between what came before and of course the grace that came with Yeshua. And again, we're defining grace more as, a work of God, a supernatural work of God in us that causes us to want to follow him and to want to obey him. Any other work, any other definition of grace, and I don't mean to minimize or constrict it, because grace is one of those big words, but the way Paul is using it has to do with, with this idea of empowerment for walking out God's precepts. And one of the texts here I'll show you in Romans, if I can find here. Romans chapter, I think it's 6. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace, right? So there we see grace as this empowerment. And again, Paul is not saying that the law is bad there, and this is one of the things where people, they misquote Paul. Whenever the law appears to be a negative in the New Testament, it's because Paul is not talking about the law per se, he's talking about the misuse of the law. So if you're trusting in the law, if you're looking at the law as a system of obligating God, as earning righteousness through your effort, that is not good. But that's not that's a misuse of the law, and Paul wanted to correct that. But the idea of grace being empowered, Paul says, "What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may increase?" Well, how preposterous, And he says here, "May it never be. How shall we who are died to sin live any longer in it?" So Paul is describing grace as something that it's inconsistent with a license to sin. It's something that is just it's something that God does in us. It's an act of grace. It's a supernatural rebirth within us that awakens us on the inside, awakens our spirit, infills our spirit, and empowers us not only to walk in obedience, but to want to walk in obedience. So that's how I would. And this is the thing with Darby and dispensationalism. Here's a guy that from at least the history that I have, if those books are correct, or the accounts, that Darby got very discouraged because the people were leaving his parish, they were leaving his church, and he felt that it was too hard for them to, this is what discouraging. It was discouraging them when he spoke about obeying God, and so they were leaving. So here's what I'll do: I'll separate. I'll redefine grace as this unmerited favor, and to some extent, you could say that it is a favor from God. We don't deserve anything, but that's not how Paul is using it. And so he began to divide salvation from lordship. So you get saved, and this is where we get this idea of you go into these meetings of thousands of people, and people pray this prayer, and they raise their hand and they're saved, and they don't have to they don't have to change anything. They just and now Darby said, okay, that's true. All you have to do is say a prayer and you're saved. You don't have to change your life. But if you want to be happy, you want to dedicate your life to and make God Lord of your life. That's what he said. So there's like two stages to it. And I remember when Sue and I met, we were just very young. I was I was like 22, and she was like 18, and I remember in the beginning of the year they wanted to make sure that we were saved. So we made a profession, and we invited Yeshua, Jesus, back into our hearts, and we were saved. And then at the end of the school, the end of the semester, they had this big bonfire, and then you had this dedication service. So now you could dedicate your life, because if you're just saved, you'll be miserable if you don't change your life. But you're saved. That was the whole point of it. But now if you really want to be happy, and one of our professors used to say, salvation doesn't bring happiness, obedience does. Well, there's a lot of truth to that on both sides, but still, the point of that saying is that, yeah, you're saved, you don't have to change anything, but if you don't change your life, you won't be happy. So the only way to be happy and saved is if you make Yeshua Lord. So they had this sharp contrast going back and forth. But that's something you see even today in dispensationalism, or some of the books about dispensationalism. But I wanted to just get back to this, though. So the Mosaic revelation, it's understood that it's not a system of works righteousness, but it is a treaty between God and His people, as a way of life, as a constitution. Yes, to walk in obedience brings blessing, but just to get away from this idea of something very harsh and contrasted with something very lenient. The two tablets. For many, many years, people thought that the two tablets, I don't have a picture, but there were two tablets of stone. And on one side were certain of the commandments, perhaps the ones that were vertically oriented, and the rest were some of the commandments. And so you had 5 commandments on each stone. And of course, I've seen that. As a matter of fact, on some of the lawns during the winter, sometimes you see the 10 commandments, and they have 5 on one side and 5 on the other side of the tablet. So you have 2 tablets, right, like this. Here you got like this. That's tablet number 1 and tablet number 2. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's usually how we see them in movies and pictures. And of course, but that's really not what was going on. At least the emphasis here is that that all of the commandments should be thought of as being on a single stone. And so you have, like here, okay, I can just add those. So there were 10 on here, and there were 10 on here. See what I mean? Like, so you have 10 and 10. So because the idea of a treaty between a king and his subjects, each party of the treaty had to have a copy of the covenant document in his possession. Now, and since in Israel's case, God was the Lord of the universe, and He dwelt within not all of God, right? God fills the universe, but there was a sense where God dwelt above the cherubim, over the Ark of the Covenant. And so in this case, you would have one copy was placed in the temple for God, and the duplicate copy was placed in the same temple for the people, because there had to be duplicate documents. Is that very confusing, or is that pretty clear? Like we're getting to this I'm just trying to enforce this idea uh, that that this was more of a treaty, similar to the ancient Hittite treaties of that day, where a king would have subjects, and the king would do something for the subjects, something life giving, and then they would respond. That's how we are to see these covenant documents. And of course, the rest is just we find it. So this is the new understanding. It's not new, for decades. This is the understanding that has been circulating, how we are to look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament. So the other thing, really quickly, I'll do, and I hope I don't hack this up, but some people find it a little unusual that within these beautiful, like wonderful commandments that are dimensions of the highest levels of morality. Thou shalt not murder, and adultery, and all these different things. That it's strange that within the center we have the Sabbath, right? And it's kind of like so the Sabbath commandment. So it's been thought strange by some that God would place the Sabbath at the center of these high and lofty commandments that deal with the highest dimensions. So how is it that a ritual type of commandment got in the middle of that? And I really do wish I had a copy of that, but I think I might. Oh, okay, wait a minute. See there? That's not that important, I guess, but still. Okay. No, I can't. Well, okay, so I can't find it, but so you've got the Ten Commandments, and in the middle you have this thing, thou shalt observe the Sabbath, and some people find that it's kind of strange. But I wanted to share with you this morning that it's a further indication of the Mosaic Law being in the form of a gracious constitution, a treaty. Because you see, in the ancient world, right, all ancient treaties, in the center of the covenant document by these monarchs and these ancient kings and despots would be a stamp or an icon or a symbol stamped into the middle of the covenant document. And that was like a seal. It was like a picture sometimes of the king, of the suzerain. And this was stamped in the clay image into the paramount. But of course, in Israel's case, you couldn't have any such representation of God, because that would be in a form of idolatry, right? So this would be an idolatrous representation of God. So what you had instead of this stamped icon stamped in the middle of the clay as a kind of a picture or a symbol of this despot, this king, that all should worship him, God just simply had a 7-day cycle of days, and that was God's seal, his symbol, to show that this people were in covenant with him, and they should be differentiated from every other people group. So that's just to think about that a little bit. I don't know. Was that clear? I mean, I think it's just that you have this ritual command smacked in the middle of these very lofty commands that deal with the highest morality, is what I'm saying. And that's puzzling to some. That's strange to some. Why would God do that? And I'm just saying to you that it's further evidence of this idea of the law being in the form of this gracious treaty between a king and his subjects. Because the idolatrous kings would stamp an idolatrous icon that would be a form of worship in the middle of that document. God could not do that. Israel was not to, have that form of idolatry. So God instead, God had a 7-day cycle of weeks that would be unique to Israel and different from every other people. And it was to separate Israel out. And this was God's mark, his seal. This is what I want. This is what I'm about. This is what I want for you. So all that to say, that's the Mosaic revelation just coming. Yeah, yeah.
That is so interesting. In contrast, have you studied like other, breakdowns of a calendar? Just for an example, I mean, people did not then follow a 7-day calendar.
Yeah, my understanding is that, that's right. My understanding is that the ancient world pretty much worked all the time, and that God said, it says, yeah. So God gives this Sabbath principle to Israel. And there's two motifs for the Sabbath. Of course, there's the Genesis motif and there's the Deuteronomy chapter 5 motif. One has to do with God finishing his labor, his work, and stepping back and appreciating what he had made, and just, really reveling in what he had made and saying, this is good, this is very good. And so we're to have times of stepping back, of course, and appreciating what you and God in partnership were able to do together. Maybe even if you didn't get all that you needed to get done. And the second motif, of course, was slavery. So the Sabbath was to be kind of like a mini Passover every week. But this was really this was new. My understanding of at least the limited stuff I've read, it was very new to the ancient world. Most of the ancient world was cyclical and it just worked all the time. And God said, that's not to be you. You're going to take 52 days off a year, or however you want to do it. Plus, and if you add up all the feast days with the intermediary days, it comes to like 79 days. You're going to take I'll just say 52. You're going to take 52 days off a year, and I am going to bless you as if you had worked those and even more. And you will have more than the nations for doing that. But God gives it to Israel. Israel gives it to the world. Thomas Cahill, an oldie but goodie, the gift of the Jews. Linear time was another gift that the Jewish people gave to the world, because most of the world was reincarnation. It was cyclical. It was cyclical. One couldn't escape their fate. It was like a snake. The concept of the big wheel, the snake chasing its tail. And remember that's why Abraham breaks out of that and goes in a linear journey. He's going. There's a destination, and that was new to the ancient world. So, but it was, my understanding was, and that's, we already say, it's interesting that you brought that up, because if you look at the concept of a day, 24 hours, that's out there. That's in the sun and the stars. That's an astronomical time measurement. If you look at a month, that's out there. That's an astronomical time measurement. If you look at a year, that's out there. It's in the sun and the moon. But the week is totally artificial. The week is something God gave to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people gave it to the world, because most of the world works on this concept of a 7-day work week cycle. And so, but God rested, and from his labor, he had times, and so we're to have that idea. And of course, the rabbis have 39 prohibitions, right? 39 things you can't do on Shabbat. Because sometimes I can find these things, and sometimes I can't. Right? 39 categories of activities that are forbidden on the Sabbath. And they get that starting in, it's Exodus, I think it's Exodus 25, where you have the jobs that were performed on the Mishkan, the ancient tabernacle. So they've extracted these from the things. So no sowing, not sowing like a needle, but sowing seed, because we said this before, their definition of work is not the normal usual word for work that we might use, which is the word avodah. Their word for work is the word malacha, and malacha is what we would describe as creative labor, right? So you can't. That's why we said that funny story before, that you could walk up a flight of stairs according to the rabbis and get winded on Shabbat, but you can't take an elevator on Shabbat. Remember the funny story with the rabbi? He was very obvious noticeably, he had a kippah and tzitzit, and he runs up like 10 flights, and he gets to the top and he's out of breath, and the bellhop says, Rabbi, says, why did you not take the elevator? And he says, because today is our Sabbath, our day of rest. See, they have a definition of work that, in a way, when you jump over to the New Testament, precludes the fact of Yeshua healing, because their definition of work was creative labor, is anything that shows your God likeness over the environment, right? If I'm working, if I'm changing, if I'm altering nature in any way, I'm showing my God likeness, my recreative nature, which is very in the image of God. And that's what you don't want to do on the Sabbath. But you can dig a ditch to some degree. You could walk up a bunch of flights of stairs. So there's all these categories that have to do with things that are described as malachah, creative labor, things that show your human mastery over the elements, things that animals can't do. You can do that. You can alter nature. You can change your environment. You can show your God likeness by what you recreate in the. That's what they say you don't do. So when Yeshua healed on the Sabbath, it was a type of recreation. It was a type of renewal. And that did not fit into the prohibitions of the rabbis. You can't do that on the Sabbath. Remember they said to him? So we've got this more, and so avodah is more. It's kind of like it's kind of like the pursuit for economic provision. That's avodah. That's like the kind of like the down to earth terms of work. And malacha is more like a creative kind of thing. They're saying what you can't do is the creative stuff. But malacha, and I talked to Dan Juster about this, pretty scholarly guy. Malacha is one of those words that it just, that might be one small part of it, but it's a big word and it means a lot, and you can't just narrowly define that word like that. So anyway, but the point is that we're just to share that we get away from this idea of sharp, airtight contrasts. This is in dispensational theology. It's airtight. Old Testament law, harsh. New Testament love, grace. That's not what's going on. That's not what's happening at all. All the covenants were full lined with God's grace. And the Mosaic law was a way of life. It was a constitution for a people who had already responded to God's grace. And it was to live this out in prosperity and blessing. Just like there are physical laws like gravity, there are spiritual laws that govern the universe. And if you disobey the spiritual laws, you suffer, although not right away, necessarily. So if I disobey gravity, I suffer right away, right? If I walk off a cliff, it's immediate. Not so with spiritual laws. And that's why people think they get away with things with spiritual laws. But things do come around, right? But Israel was to have this exemplary life. They were to be a window to the world, to the nations. They had laws that governed economics. They had laws that governed their military. They had laws that governed family. And just a host of things you can imagine. And it was full of the life and the wisdom of God, so much that the nations in I think it's Deuteronomy 5, they were to look and they were to see who is behind this. What wise God is behind this amazing, gracious way of life. And so, anyway, we don't have a lot of time left, and that's okay. So I think maybe 10 minutes, and I just wanted to switch gears a little bit, and I don't know if that was others have done a better job with that, but with that whole idea of how we're to the nature of the Mosaic revelation, how we're to look at that. But I did want to touch on the word Zion, and because I know very, very little Hebrew, I can try to write it in cursive, right? So if we to do it in block. Sion. So Sion, right? Zion, Sion. It's a word you have. It's I don't know how many times it's in your Bible. A lot. It's all over the place. I don't have a number, but it's a lot. And so I just want to look at the word as we finish today. And Zion, of course, is a word. It's connected to Jerusalem in the Bible and the future hope of Israel. But first, we said last time, we just kind of touched on this, and said if we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 5, we see this where we first find this word. So 2 Samuel chapter 5, and it says here, verse 6, now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. Of course, this is David, right? He's chapter 5 of 2 Samuel. And they went against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, and they said to David, you shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame shall turn you away, thinking David could not come in. So the Jebusites were boasting that this fortress situated on this mound, this hill, was indefensible, was undefensible, right? It was impregnable. I mean, you can't. Even those who are blind and lame and deaf, we'll send that. They'll keep you out of here because it's so impregnable, right? So it said, nevertheless, in verse 7, David captured the stronghold of Zion. So that's where we see it right now, okay? That is the city of David. Okay, so that's our introduction to this word Sion, right? Zion. And so Zion, we said, that kind of enters the Bible as this kind of really insignificant little mountain that it's really not, it's not much of anything, and it's just, so Zion is associated with a place. We see, right, it's a piece of geography. It's a place. And of course this comes later, as we see in the Bible. This word Sion or Zion comes to be a symbol, right, for really the glory of David's reign, and of course David's greater son ruling and reigning from the earth, from Jerusalem. So, but we see it in this very limited way. We see it as this little stronghold in this place. And as we said, when we get to the Psalms and the prophets, this starts to open up into these amazing descriptions, that go far beyond David's reign and really what I think what David could have imagined even. So, and the prophets elaborate. So let's I'll read one or two. Last time we had people read. I'll just read just to save time. Joel chapter 3 verse 17, and there's like 25 of these references. Let me just go to Joel. Okay. So Joel chapter 3 verse 17, and I think I saw this one. Okay, so then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will pass through it no more. That's on, as Don Finto would say, God's to-do list, right? That hasn't happened yet, right? Israel is pretty much a secular state today, and it's not dwelling in security. So I like the Isaiah ones. So I'll just go Isaiah 62 and Isaiah 2. So let's just go to Isaiah. Okay, so Isaiah 2. Let's see, Isaiah 2 real quick. We'll just do this one here. Okay, this is very famous, right? Right, we do this one here, right? And many people will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. And mountain can also be government. The government of God is going to increase. It's not just going to happen all of a sudden. Think about it. We've been here for 2,000 years, right? And we're starting to straighten out. God is working through his body. And we're starting to get to the place where God wants us to be. But when Yeshua comes back here, it's not just going to, his government is going to increase more and more and more. And just like we overlap into the millennial kingdom because we have a taste of what it's like, and that overlaps into this age now, so is the millennial age going to overlap into the new heavens and the new earth. And that's going to overlap into, so it's all overlapping. And this is real stuff, friends. So Yeshua is going to come, and it's going to take a while to get things back to where they get ready for that eternal state. You know what I'm saying? It's just going to take even Yeshua, it's going to take time. he's gonna his righteousness, his government is going to increase more and more and more in the earth, and it's going to develop. So, but that's what we find here. So, for the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he will judge between nations and render many decisions for many people. And so that's one there. And then just Isaiah 62. This is one of my favorite ones. It is so powerful. And Isaiah, of course, Isaiah 62. Um, um, okay, so yeah. 62, yeah. For Zion's sake, for Zion's sake, I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not keep quiet until her righteousness goes forth like the brightness. That hasn't happened yet, right? Okay, and her salvation like the torch that is burning. The nations will see your righteousness. That hasn't happened yet, right? Right? People want to destroy Israel, right? And all the kings your glory, and you will be called a new name. And so that's so all this to say that Zion starts out as this little hill, insignificant, and then by the time we get to the Psalms and the prophets, it's developed into this majestic description and place that goes far beyond what David's reign that he could ever have imagined, perhaps. And so here's the point. Why to go through all of that? Because see what's happened today, and especially after the fall of Jerusalem and the civil war that came later, the Bar Kokhba revolt, the hope of Zion, which was earthy and very connected with Israel and the Davidic reign and Yeshua sitting on the throne of David and all that earthy, it kind of shifted into more kind of universal kind of thing, and it's and more of a heavenly kind of concept. So it went from something earthy and promised to David and David's greater descendant to rule on the in the millennial kingdom on the earth into kind of a heavenly, more universal kind of concept. So today you see Lutheran Zion Church, you see you see various descriptions of different churches that are called use the term Zion, and so a Zion, which was originally like earthly Israel and the future promises of the kingdom of God on earth, right? And the reign of Yeshua sitting on David's throne, but since has been separated from Israel and now applied spiritually to the church. There's no surprise. We talk about that a lot around here, placement theology. So this is just one example of how that has happened, because Zion is a term that has historically been connected with Israel and the Jewish people and literally the physical fulfillment of Israel's earthly promises. And of course, Yeshua is going to bring heaven and earth together, right? Ephesians chapter 1, I'm going to bring heaven and earth together. In a sense, someone said Yeshua is even an advance for God, because God wants to get into the earth. He wants to get back into the earth, right? And Yeshua brings heaven and earth together. So that which was originally connected to Israel and the future hope of Yeshua sitting on David's throne, reigning from Jerusalem, has now been separated from its earthly moorings and now applied in a universal kind of ethereal, more heavenly kind of way. But there are three things, and there's probably a lot, but I'm going to just like three things that have happened, that events that have taken place that have caused Christian, or at least with those within Christian circles, to reconsider God's promises to Israel. Number one, first of all, was the Holocaust. And there's been so much written on the Holocaust from a sociological perspective, from a psychological perspective. But I don't think there's a lot written about the Holocaust from a purely theological perspective. But the reality is that the Holocaust has amazing theological implications if you think about it. In other words, if God were finished, and think about this, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, rulers of this evil darkness, right? So you can see the acts of humankind are moved along by these demonic forces, right? So if God is finished with the Jewish people, replaced them, no, nothing more with them, why, after 2,000 years, right? Uh, you know, was this madman's attempt at genocide one of the most earth-shattering and defining events of the entire 20th century? See what I'm saying? It's just it doesn't make sense. And I wanted to just quote from this article here. So the first reason why that have caused Christians to reconsider how we are to understand God's promises to the Jewish people in Israel, and to understand they've not been uh, changed to spiritually to the church and everything, is the Holocaust. Because it would make no sense. So let me just read this article to you. I found it says, remember, it says, if, however, the dissolution of the nation of Israel, the destruction of the temple, and the dispersion of many of the Jewish inhabitants of the land were all God's way of very publicly declaring his permanent divorce from Israel, okay? If that were true, then it would make no sense whatsoever to have Satan continuing to direct all of his rage against that specific people and that specific land at the end of the age 2,000 years into the future. So I said, as we said, if God were finished with the Jewish people, why, after nearly 2,000 years, with this madman's attempt to destroy them, why would the enemy be motivating that? It doesn't make any sense unless they are absolutely and very significant. And that the revival of the planet, it depends on them coming into their own election and coming into their own destiny. That has to be. Israel coming into her destiny as circumcised in heart is going to be the fire starter for the redemption of the whole world. And so Satan knows that. Satan understands that. So his rage is directed to them. Then he goes, or let's reword this, okay? If Israel is now just like any other nation, and if the Jews are no different than any other people, then something must be wrong. Apparently, Satan didn't get the memo. Isn't that interesting? If the Lord had rejected and divorced Israel from her corporate calling as his special people, then there would be no reason for Satan to place such a great emphasis on and expend so much energy at the end of the age to assault Jerusalem and the Jewish people. This simply would make no sense. So isn't that interesting? So one of the reasons that much of the church is now rethinking the fact that Israel, God is not finished with Israel. Israel has promises that are unilateral and unconditional. And Israel will yet come into her election and her calling. And when she does, look out, world. Look out, world. It's going to be the starter of a wave of knowledge and blessing going out to the world, because they will finally be stepping back into their calling and their destiny as a people. And God will reward and use that election to bring many hundreds of thousands, even millions from the nations, because the church is only a remnant. What do you think the church is? The church is just a remnant. It's just a small slice of the nations of all the world. That's what Israel is. We have two remnants put together, and you call it the church, the body of Messiah. But the prophets speak of a day when the knowledge of God is just going to be lit up all over the place. And people are going to come in, like flooding in. The nations are going to embrace the God of Israel like they've never done before. But all this is dependent upon Israel fulfilling her own calling, her own election, and stepping into her destiny as a people. That's why we talk about in Plea over Pittsburgh, why this insignificant, at least as far as numbers, people group, that's so insignificant in terms of numbers, that when you invest in this little insignificant people group, you are investing in the whole world. You see, because God knows God the ramifications. So number two, so that's one of the factors that to look at to see why would Satan motivate this madman to destroy this people after 2,000. It makes no sense if God is just finished with it. It doesn't make any sense. Number two, just look at the state of Israel in 1948. And after that we'll just do one more and that's it. Okay, the fact that a Jewish Israel, right, has emerged after nearly 1,700, 2,000 years has caused the church to kind of re-examine so much everything it thought about Israel and to ask serious questions about how the modern state of Israel relates to ancient Israel and the connectedness of that. Number three, and finally, this is what I'll say, the third area that has really caused the church to reconsider God's promises to Israel and maybe, just maybe, that they have not been replaced by the church today, is this idea of the gospel spreading throughout the world. We are coming to the place where the success of the gospel may actually cover the world, the expansion of the gospel to the nations, to the point where for the first time you're getting to a place where if it is possible that every people group could be reached within our lifetimes. And so that's in so this is a key milestone in the preaching of the gospel. And the fact that this milestone is now within reach, I would submit, forces us to re-examine the gospel mission in light of Paul's, whole conviction in Romans that the success of the gospel is primarily ultimately exists for the provocation of Israel, because that's what it says in Romans chapter 11. I say then, have they stumbled so as to fall beyond recovery? God forbid, but rather through their rejection of Yeshua, salvation has come to the Gentiles in order to provoke Israel to jealousy. So now we're getting to the point where we're seeing that the expansion of the gospel ultimately exists for the provocation of Israel. It's coming to the end, and at the end, God is going to use that to provoke his people to come up from their stumbling and provoke them to come up and rise up again and embrace their own Messiah. And when that happens, it's going to be like life from the dead. It's going to have resurrection level status for the world. So those three things, I just want to say, the Holocaust, the rebirth of Israel, and of course the expansion of the gospel to the point now where we're getting to the place where we see the success of it on the earth, and that to see what Paul is saying, that it really does ultimately exist for Israel's salvation and provocation. And so that's really all I feel like I could do today. So we can kind of close there. Any thoughts or additions or comments? So these three events. I'll just kind of close with this. So now with that, now that we have this idea that perhaps people are seeing the significance of Israel and her promises, and that this hasn't been replaced with the church. Now, how do we? So Israel's important. Israel's salvation is very important to God, because there are ramifications to that we don't that we are going to see in the earth, and so that's important. So with that said, how do we reconcile Israel's importance with this transition that has taken place today, with the majority? We come to the New Covenant Scriptures, and the majority of Israel is cut off. So you've got this funny situation now where Israel is both an elect nation, at the same time they're kind of cut off. At the same time, the majority of Israel is very anti-Yeshua, anti-Jesus. So Israel is both chosen and elect, and yet they're cut off from their inheritance right now. As a people group, they're saved, but individually, individuals within that people group are resisting the gospel, and resisting their inheritance. So that's the dilemma when we come into the New Testament. And let me just say, the New Testament, why was the New Testament written? Well, there are a lot of reasons. It's a big question, I know that. And I don't pretend to have any great answer to that. But I do think that the New Testament was written from a pastoral perspective, primarily to deal with a couple of things. Number one, the revelation of the King of Kings, the revelation of Yeshua himself. That was very important. And the challenges that would come to, right, the Gentiles, or the challenge that would come with the expansion of God, of the people of God from Israel to now to the nations, without the nations first having to become Jewish. That's what we say. You know, we say sometimes, how do we differentiate from a regular synagogue or a traditional synagogue? Well, a number of ways. You know, Yeshua is the center of our worship. Our preaching and teaching takes the New Covenant scriptures into account primarily too, and the fact that the people of God now under New Covenant order is now that Gentiles are included in the people of God without first having to become Jewish. I mean, you know that's the way it was, right? Gentiles, those from the nations would come into Israel, they would become circumcised, which was a way of saying they would embrace the Jewish life and practice. And then they would come into the nation and they could partake of the blessings and they could be part of the redeemed people of God. But today, with the transition, the nations are coming in as they are. And that was the big shock, right? That was the big shock. The shock wasn't that, well, that was the big shock. One of the big shockers, because the New Covenant, the New Testament was a surprise, right? I mean, what was supposed to happen didn't happen, right? Right? Jesus wasn't acting very Messiah-like, right? When he was walking around and the Romans were still forcing Jews to carry their bags. John had doubts. John the Baptist, right? Yochanan had doubts. Are you the one? Are you sure? You don't seem to be acting very Messiah-like. You know, the government in Rome is still in charge. They're still forcing us. They're still humiliating us. And of course, what was his answer? John, you see the lame walk, the gospel, the poor of the gospel preached to us, the blind receive their sight. So yeah, the kingdom is here. I brought the kingdom. It's broken in. It's broken in now. You can taste it. It's here. There's going to be an overlapping. One day it's going to be here in its totality, but that's not to say it's not here in its reality. Now it is. It's here. You can see it. You can taste it. Wherever the rule of God is ruling, there's the kingdom, right? Wherever you see the rule of God ruling over someone's life, there's the kingdom. Wherever you see the kingdom of heaven breaking in and healing and demonstrating there's the kingdom there. But it's like throwing seed today. It can hit 1,000 people, and out of that 1,000, maybe 15 or 16 will respond. Because it all depends on the soil of your heart. That's how the kingdom is here now. It's an inaugurated form. It's the already not yet form of the kingdom, as George Ladd, I think, in his great book described it as. And so, yeah, he brings the kingdom. But so the new covenant was written from a pastoral perspective to deal with the revelation of Yeshua. That's a big revelation. And the challenges that would come with the expansion of the gospel now to the Gentiles. Remember, Peter and James and John in the first chapters of Acts had an eschatology. They had an end times scheme, just like the Orthodox too. The Orthodox have everything worked out, by the way. You believe they have everything worked out to the T. They believe this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. But they had everything worked out, and it didn't include the Gentiles. They thought we'll get all of Israel saved first, then we'll go to the Gentiles, right? The receptivity of the Gentiles to the gospel before all of Israel would be saved was an unexpected surprise. Well, God knew that. He had to bring in those from the nations to pray Israel back into her destiny. Anything less would never have worked. So this explains why much of the New Testament seems to focus on the Gentiles and Jewish-Gentile relationships. Paul's letters were not written primarily to argue that Israel had a future that was given. He didn't have Paul's letters are not to redefine Israel. The New Testament was not written to rewrite what had come before. It wasn't written to redefine what Israel is. Oh, now it's a spiritual thing. It's not really. We're not really interested in this ethnic people group. No, that's not why it was written. It was written to reveal the coming of the King. It was written primarily to deal with this shocking transition of nations flooding in from every place in the world and being brought into the people of God without becoming Jewish. And it was written not to argue that Israel had a future, but the great response of the Gentiles now to the gospel, and it was written on guidance on how to relate now to each other. You know, there was a lot of hurt feelings, and there was a lot of animosity between Jews and Gentiles. Even right up until we get to the book of Acts, Gentiles were God-fearers, proselytes, but they were still kind of relegated to second-class status. They were sitting in the back of the shul, perhaps. But and the rabbis would go around seeking to make converts, and they would have them jump through all kinds of hoops. And that's why they were jealous of Paul, because Paul now was getting great success in the book of Acts. Gentiles were coming in by the hundreds and thousands. And they were coming in and they had equal status, first-class status, right up there sitting in the front of the shul with the Jews without having to go through all these hoops, becoming circumcised and going through all these Jewish demands and things. And so the new covenant comes on to clarify this, to bring light to this. This transition was a shocking thing. So that's it for today. I went a little bit over, and next time we'll pick it up with one thing I'd like to share with you is the successes and failures of Israel. Because we sometimes think, oh, well, Israel, they failed. No, I want to tell you something. Like I said before, you think if Yeshua had gone to the Romans, you think that would have been very successful? We have to recognize the successes of Israel, what she has done as a people. We're not trying to cover over our mistakes. I said one of the reasons why I believe that the Bible is a sacred book and inspired is because I don't know of any other sacred text that describes itself negatively. The Jews describe themselves very negatively in the Torah. They shoot themselves in the foot, right? I don't know any other holy or sacred text where the people that are the subjects of that faith describe themselves and write about themselves negatively like that. But anyway, so we'll see with all their successes and their failures, and that's we'll end with that. So that's it. Thanks, Ari.